Now to chapter 17 and verse 20. Jesus is praying for all the believers. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may know and believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I am in them, and you in me. May they be brought to complete unity, to let the world know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me.
It's just great, actually, to see all you guys here. And I do agree that, we've almost got a Broadway and a King's Church here. But next time, one of the things that I was really amazed by was 2 or 3 months ago, we had a meeting, a couple of us from here with a couple of your Broadway leaders. And the question that I had when we were thinking about the joint service was, well, what's God been saying to you as a church? And what's he been saying to us? And is there any area of commonality? I mean, obviously, lots of things God will always be saying, but particularly for now. And I was stunned that the 3 things that God had been emphasizing to us were the same 3 things that he's been emphasizing to you. So I think it's good to think about them a little more. Those 3 are being bold, strong and very courageous, about outreach, and about unity. And I think that today, here, this kind of service is actually really important for our town. And I'll talk about some of the reasons why that is. But today, I want us to think about unity, not just as something that we as 2 congregations do every 3 months, but as something that we each do all the time. Yes, we do this between our 2 churches, but each of us within our own church community. What does that mean for us individually? So, starting not with the unity, but with the being strong and very courageous. What does this mean? Well, do you think it takes courage to stand here and talk to you lot? Hands up, anybody who doesn't feel that they have the courage to do that. But you do have the courage to put your hand up. Okay, so we've got some. I actually know there are more than that, don't I? Mentioning no names. So does that then mean that I'm more courageous than you are? Trevor, who's been doing a lot of the sound and is now out with the children, is a builder, and he's been working on our roof for the last couple of weeks. And on the first day, he invited me up the scaffolding to have a look at the view. Now, I am not good with heights. If I have to go up a 6-foot ladder, I start getting really nervous. I did it, but on the way up, I was taking deep breaths, and I was clinging onto each rung of the ladder for dear life. Was it worth it? Yes, actually it was. It was an amazing view. But Trevor runs up and down this ladder dozens of times a day, especially when there's a cup of tea on offer. So is Trevor more courageous than I am then? Well, what makes the difference between somebody being courageous and not? Well, one thing is it important? One difference between being courageous and being stupid is why you're doing it. Many years ago, my daughter, who was then aged about 6, was in the kitchen, in bare feet, when the crockery cupboard started to shift off the wall, and the plates and the cups sliding out of the cupboard around her and smashing on the floor. I was at the other end of the kitchen, also in bare feet. So what did I do? Well, it was important to get her out of the kitchen before the whole cupboard comes down. That was my sense of it. So yes, I walked across the kitchen among the smashed crockery in bare feet to get her and carry her out. Was that courageous? Well, at the time, I just thought, I need to do this. But another thing that I think helps with courage is experience. The first time I walk on the scaffolding, I have no experience of it actually holding me because I've never been up there before. But Trevor has done it hundreds of times. So it doesn't take much courage for him each time to go up. The first time I spoke in front of a group of people, I was nervous. I didn't know how they were going to respond, whether I'd look stupid, etc., 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 all the stuff. But I survived, and gradually you learn how to handle larger groups and more complex situations. So knowing what we're each called to do is important, and then making a start. And we've heard some lovely testimonies. Thank you guys for people doing that this week. It doesn't really matter if it takes me a while each time to summon up the courage to go up the ladder, but it would matter if Trevor took 5 or 10 minutes summoning the courage every time he had to go up the ladder, because he's a builder. I'm not called to be a builder. I am called to save my daughter. So knowing what we're each called to do is important, and making a start. The line, be strong and very courageous, as you know, comes from Joshua chapter 1. And this was said to Joshua 3 times in that chapter, twice by God and once by the people, when they were about to cross the Jordan into the land that God had promised them. Then in chapter 3, the priests are called to take a step into the water of the river, and then the water will part for them. Now they knew that God had previously parted the waters of the Red Sea so that the whole nation could cross through. So they had experience of God intervening. So this wasn't something completely out of the blue for the Israelites. But this time, they had to step in first, and then the waters would part. So this is God teaching them, partly based on their experience and partly just take the next step. You notice God didn't say, okay, what I want you to do then is to take a really good run up and then jump as far as you can and land in the water, and when you get there, I'll part it. Because that would have been stupid. What he said was, put your feet in the water and I will part it. It's just one extra step he's leading them on. Now, in the first reading from John 15 that Graham read for us, Jesus says he's giving us one command, to love each other as he has loved us. And Jesus goes on to say that he chose us so that we will go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever we ask in Jesus' name, the Father will give us. And then he repeats, this is my command, love one another. So what I take from this is that when we know that we're doing something that God is calling us to do, something that will bear lasting fruit, and we know that God will answer our prayers, then personally that gives me the confidence to step out. But notice that this confidence is based on Jesus' single but repeated command that we love one another. And for me, one area that I'm working on, and we've heard a couple of examples of it, this morning, one of the areas that I'm working on for myself is outreach. Now, I don't see myself as someone who goes around telling everyone they're a sinner, whether they want to know or not. And for me, that's partly because of the negative reaction I had when people did it to me. But one thing that I've noticed with Jesus is that unless he was giving general teaching to a crowd, he would start by getting into conversations with people, getting to know them, and taking an interest. So my next step in reaching out to others is making relationships and getting into meaningful conversations with a wider range of people. My neighbours, it's a good place to start, but also the people that I meet in the town, and then seeing where the conversations lead. Now, that isn't the end of the process, but for me, it's the first step into the water, at which point the waters part and I can go further forward. And it's quite interesting. I was actually talking to a cashier in the supermarket a couple of weeks ago and said, so when do you knock off kind of thing, just a way to start the conversation. We got into the conversation because there was nobody in the queue behind me, and it turns out that he's a singer in a band. He lives locally here. His band is based in the West Country, and he goes down there a lot of weekends. And he could obviously hear I was interested, and he said to me, "Do you play?" And I said, "Well, yes, I play in the band in church several times a month, but also," and I told him about Praise in the Park. And he said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll see if I can come to that." A bloke at the checkout in Sainsbury's. So God is definitely parting waters as we step out. Now, I know that at some point when we have conversations with people, I want them to know, first of all, who Jesus really is, and second, the fact that I have a relationship with God, which is also on offer to them. And in Graham's second reading, Jesus' prayer, Jesus prays that just as he and the Father are one, all of us may be one. In verse 21, so that the world will know that the Father sent Jesus. That Jesus is not just a religious teacher. He's not a philosopher. He's not some bloke with good ideas who lived and died 2,000 years ago. People need to know that he came from heaven into this world in time and space to sort us out. That is who he is. And then Jesus prays again to the Father in verse 23 that they, meaning us, may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and that you have loved them just as you've loved me. In other words, not only who Jesus is and what he came to do, but that we have a relationship with him. People will know that if we have unity. How does that work? Dunno. But if you don't agree, argue with Jesus, he said piously. So Jesus is saying and praying that somehow our unity is the starting point for having the courage to follow his leading and bearing fruit, including showing people out there who Jesus really is, and that we have, and they can have, a relationship with God. Our unity is the starting point, and that's why I want to focus on that today. And the more I've been thinking about this, the more fundamental I realize this is in the New Testament in particular. Jesus says in Matthew 5:23, if you're offering your gift at the altar, so in other words, if you're bringing a tribute or making a sacrifice to God, if you're doing that and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave the gift there. Go and find your brother or sister, be reconciled to them, and then come back and offer your gift. Why? Why don't say, well, I'll just finish offering my gift first and then I'll go and sort it out? Well, the answer is because whether we are united or not affects how pleased God is with our offerings, with our prayers, with our worship, and so on. And John, in his first letter, chapter 3, even writes, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. If you'd asked me, how do we know whether we've passed from death to life, that wouldn't have been my first response. But there it is. Okay, so time for some poetry. Who likes poetry? Okay. This is going to be an education for you then. The great thing about poetry is that it paints word pictures which help us to see things more effectively than just a straight explanation. So, Graham, would you do the honours with Psalm 133, please? There we go. Song of Ascent of David. So I'll just read this through. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It's like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It's as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life evermore. That's it. 3 verses. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been reading this psalm for years. But if I'm honest, I've usually said to myself, well, obviously unity is the key message here, right? We get that from the first bit and the last bit. But surely it could have been shorter. Couldn't he just have said how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity? For there the Lord bestows his blessing, life evermore. Simple, nice and clear. How is a message about unity helped by this bit about oil poured over somebody's head and going down into his collar? Or the dew falling on one mountain, going and falling on another mountain? How does that help us with the concept of unity? So, if you could just put up verse 1 again, Graham, for me. It says, it's good and pleasant for God's people, brothers and sisters, to live together in unity. So first of all, what do we mean by unity, briefly? Well, it means as one, without divisions or barriers. It doesn't mean uniformity. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12 that it's like a human body. It's one body, but it's made up of lots of different parts, each with a different role, but working together. We aren't all the same. Because I'm not a medical person, I like the same analogy with the band. You've got somebody on drums, you've got somebody on bass, you've got somebody on acoustic guitar, you've got keys, you've got electric guitar and so on. They don't all play the same. You have singers who don't all sing the tune. Some of them sing harmonies. They're doing different stuff, but they're doing it as one. Secondly, living together in unity means that we talk. It doesn't, we get to know one another. We have a relationship. We interact. And we do it in, but also for, unity. That's the foundation for the world knowing who Jesus is, remember. Now, there's a guy who lives a few houses down my road, further along. He seems like a nice guy. He smiles whenever we pass each other on the street. And I'm not aware so far that we disagree on anything in terms of priorities, attitudes, and even political views. Would you say we're united? Well, no, because I've never actually spoken to him. We don't disagree because we never talk about anything. So, us being here today, meeting together as churches to worship and pray and talk together is a key step towards real unity. But it's also vital that we look at unity with our brothers and sisters in Christ that we deal with on a daily or weekly basis, rather than saying hi to you guys and then it'll be a couple of months before I see most of you again. That's the foundation for the world knowing who Jesus is. So verse 2, Graham. So what about this messy oil then? I mean, I don't know about you, but I get annoyed if I'm eating something with olive oil and some of it gets on my shirt, because I know Jill's going to tell me off about how hard it is to get it out, right? And here you've got it all over the guy's head, running down his beard. Perhaps you could give us a demo later, Johnny. And into his clothes. I mean, yuck. I've just been reading through Leviticus, and there are lots of details about what Aaron, as the high priest, has to do to be allowed into God's presence. He can't just walk in, otherwise he dies. He has to wear his special robes, and he has to be anointed with special oil. Then he can go in and speak to God. We, through Jesus, have access to God the Father, and unity, according to this psalm, is the oil which gives us the right to go in. And in verse 2, it's not just a quick token dab on his forehead to say he's done it. It's poured over his head in abundance. When we're dwelling with our brothers and sisters in unity, we can come before God with an abundance of blessing. Put simply, our unity affects our prayers. Equally, any lack of unity affects our prayers. As I said just now, it's great that as churches, we're taking active steps towards meaningful unity. But it's also important to look at the unity with our brothers and sisters in our own congregations. So if we want to deepen our relationship with God our Father and deepen our prayer life, checking on our unity with our brothers and sisters is a good place to start. Graham, could we have verse 3, please? So what about Mount Hermon then? Well, those of you with a detailed knowledge of Middle Eastern geography will know that Mount Hermon is over 2,800 meters high. So it's well over twice the height of Ben Nevis. And it's located in a very dry area of the world. The closest city I could find data on, because I look things up, gets about 2.5 inches of rain per year. By comparison, here we get 29. Okay? They get 2.5. But because Mount Hermon is so high, it gets a lot of snow in the winter and in the spring, which stays covering all its 3 peaks for most of the year. The runoff, which is when it rains or snows and melts immediately, seeps into the soil, and it allows for fertile plant life all the way below the snow line, including abundant vineyards. This vegetation doesn't grow because of the rainfall. It grows because of the abundance of the water running off Mount Hermon. And also, the melting snow seeps down through the rock. It emerges as springs at the base of the mountain and forms streams, which merge to become the River Jordan, feeding the Sea of Galilee and irrigating the land of Israel. So Mount Hermon is actually one of the greatest resources in and for the whole region. Now we know Mount Zion in the Old Testament as the location of the holy place in the temple in Jerusalem where God's presence is manifest among his people. And by contrast with Mount Hermon, Mount Zion is a little over 700 meters high. So it's about a quarter of the height of Mount Hermon. And it's in an area that gets 23 inches of rain. We get 29, Jerusalem gets about 23. So stuff grows. The problem in that area is that for 5 months, every year, they get a total of about 1 inch of rain. All the rest of it falls in the other 7. 1 inch in 5 months. And unlike Mount Hermon, Mount Zion isn't high enough to affect the water supply. So for 7 months of the year, the crops are growing in soil that's well soaked at the beginning, but gradually dries out. And the inhabitants would be praying that after 5 arid months, the rains would come again to soak the ground. If not, famine. So the picture here in verse 3 is of the brothers and sisters, God's people, living in Jerusalem in God's presence, but with a permanent and abundant supply of life-giving water. When we live together in unity, God promises a blessing, life forevermore. Now, one thing to notice about this is that when the rain comes in Jerusalem, you know, all right? If you get 20 odd inches of rain in 5 months, when it rains, it's pretty heavy. They know. Some months it pours and they can stand out in the rain and get absolutely soaked. And we often look for God's blessing like this, don't we? We look for the times when there's a sudden pouring or soaking. It can be spectacular. The problem is that we often think it's somehow more real or more special because we felt something. But this promise of life-giving water from Mount Hermon is one where you can't see or hear the rain, or stand under it and experience getting soaked. In the psalm, God's promising something better than Zion rain. He's promising that the blessing that comes from unity will be abundant, all-pervading, nourishing, feeding life and growth, and permanent. But you won't be able to point to it and say, there it is. Like dew, you know it's there because the ground's wet. The blessing from unity nourishes everything. But we only know that it's happening because of the effect of it. We don't see it as such. So, just getting practical then, how do we do that? Well, I'm glad you asked me that. In Ephesians 4, verses 1 to 3, Paul writes, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. And do you remember the calling that we've received is that he has chosen and appointed us to go out and bear fruit. That's our calling. So to live a life worthy of the calling you've received with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So the first thing is it takes work. Paul says in verse 3, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. And the expression used there for make every effort means make haste, hurry up, be zealous, be eager. Keeping the unity isn't something that will just happen. We need to work at it eagerly and without dawdling. So how do we work at it? Well, with all humility is the first thing Paul says. Do I see myself, my opinions, my gifts, my preferences, or my discernment as better or more important than those of others? Is the fact that I can stand here and talk more important than Trevor being able to go up and fix my roof? We each know in part and we prophesy in part. And I notice that here Paul isn't talking about have a touch of humility. It's be completely humble, with all humility, literally. Gentleness. How do we speak to one another? How do we speak to one another if we're disagreeing? Do we do it gently? Patience. Bearing with one another. Do certain situations or topics or people just rub me up the wrong way? Altogether, yes. Okay. So learning how to manage ourselves there is key here. Bearing with one another through the bond of peace. So I think it would be good just for a moment if we pause there and we each think about these areas here, making effort to maintain unity, acting with all humility, with gentleness, patience, and in peace. Which of those do I do reasonably well, and which are the ones that I think I struggle with? If you just take a moment for yourself to reflect and bring it before God if there's one that you feel you need to work on. And then finally, let's talk. I can't say that I'm united with the bloke down the road if I never speak to him. And especially here with our brothers and sisters. If I keep saying, I'm Martin, if I keep saying or doing something which you disagree with or you find annoying, but you don't tell me, I don't know. I think we're unified, but actually we aren't. So we both don't get the blessing that comes from unity. If we talk, we can sort it out. Maybe we'll agree to disagree, but we can do it in peace and love. And then we can each come before our Heavenly Father knowing that our prayers and praise will be pleasing to Him. So if you're feeling frustrated, irritated, or upset with a brother or sister in Christ, think first, is it important? I know that sometimes I get irritated about something and really, I just need to get a life. Do I need to raise the matter with them, or is it something that's actually just a matter of taste or trivial? If it's that, I just need to put it in the bin and move on. But if it is important, we need to think how we're going to discuss it with them with humility, gentleness, patience, and maintaining the bond of peace. And if someone comes to us with an issue about something that we say or do we receive that with all humility, gentleness, patience, and peace? So again, it'd be good if we just pause briefly there and we can each think about what's the thing for me maybe that I need to think about here. Is it something I need to raise? Do I react poorly when someone comes to me with an issue about something? How will I stay humble, gentle, patient, and peaceful? And for some of us, this could be another opportunity to be courageous and take the first step.